The city was buzzing with excitement that morning. Posters of the world-famous chess Grandmaster hung across the main street. Cafes were filled with talk about the upcoming match, and even people who didn't usually follow chess were curious. It wasn't just another tournament, it was the event of the year. The Grandmaster, a man known for his sharp mind and confident attitude, had arrived to play a series of exhibition matches for charity. Everyone wanted to see him in action, to witness the way his mind worked, how he thought 10 steps ahead of everyone else, and how easily he defeated his opponents. The Grandmaster had built a reputation over the years as a legend. He was the kind of player who could predict his opponent's next move before they even realized what they were doing. Cameras followed him everywhere. Journalists asked endless questions, and chess enthusiasts admired every word he said. When he walked into the grand hall that day, dressed in a sharp black suit and carrying his favorite wooden chessboard, the audience broke into applause. He smiled, waved, and nodded confidently. To everyone in that room, he was not just a player. He was the symbol of genius. The tournament hall looked magnificent. Golden lights glowed from chandeliers above, and the marble floor reflected the shine of polished chess tables lined up neatly across the room. The air smelled of fresh coffee and excitement. Spectators filled the seats, whispering about who the Grandmaster might face first. Some people had traveled from other cities just to see him play live. Everyone was waiting for something spectacular, a game that would be remembered for years. The Grandmaster loved this kind of attention. He thrived on it. He greeted fans, signed autographs, and posed for photos. He spoke charmingly to the audience, cracking jokes and talking about his past victories. His confidence was unshakable, almost playful. To him, chess wasn't just a game. It was a performance, a stage where he could shine brighter than anyone else. Before the event began, the host stepped onto the stage and announced that the Grandmaster would be playing a few friendly exhibition matches with randomly selected participants from the audience. The crowd cheered. Everyone laughed and clapped, knowing that whoever sat across from the Grandmaster would have no real chance of winning. It was all in good fun, or so they thought. From the back row, a modest-looking woman watched quietly. She was dressed simply, in a faded blue dress, her hair tied neatly behind her. She wasn't loud or flashy. She didn't try to push through the crowd or attract attention. In fact, most people didn't even notice her. She had come to watch, not to play, or at least that's what she believed at first. As the host picked names from a small box, the Grandmaster smiled proudly. The first few players were enthusiastic fans, nervous and thrilled just to be sitting across from their idol. The games were short. The Grandmaster defeated them easily, each match lasting less than 10 minutes. The audience clapped after every win, laughing and cheering as the Grandmaster made witty remarks about his moves. The mood was light, cheerful, almost like a comedy show. But then something unexpected happened. When the host reached into the box again, he pulled out a small folded piece of paper with a name that no one recognized. He announced it aloud, "Elena." There was a brief pause as people turned their heads, trying to see who it was. The modest woman in the blue dress looked surprised. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she had really heard her name. But when the host repeated it, she smiled shyly and stood up. The crowd clapped politely as she walked to the stage. The Grandmaster looked amused. "Ah, we have a brave volunteer," he said with a grin. "Come, don't worry, I promise I'll go easy on you." Laughter filled the room. Even Elena smiled nervously, though her calm eyes suggested a quiet confidence that no one else noticed. She sat down across from him, her hands gentle as she adjusted the chess pieces. The Grandmaster leaned back in his chair, clearly relaxed. To him, this was just another easy round, a short game to entertain the crowd. He didn't think much of his new opponent. After all, she looked so ordinary, so simple that the idea of her posing any challenge seemed impossible. The audience whispered among themselves. Some people joked softly, wondering how long it would take for the Grandmaster to win. A few even took out their phones to record the match, hoping to capture another funny moment. No one expected anything special. No one thought this woman would be capable of surprising a man of such brilliance. The cameras zoomed in. The timer was set. The room quieted down as the host gave the signal. The Grandmaster smiled again, picked up his pawn and made the first move, a simple opening, confident and casual. Elena nodded, studying the board quietly before making her move in return. At that moment, No one could have imagined that this simple match, a game meant to be nothing more than a joke, would soon become one of the most unforgettable moments in chess history. The crowd didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness something extraordinary. The air in the hall, still light and cheerful, carried a sense of something unspoken, a calm before the storm. And as the Grandmaster leaned forward, preparing his next move, Elena's eyes focused sharply on the board. Behind her modest smile and quiet posture, something powerful was waiting, a mind sharper than anyone expected, and a story that would silence the entire room. The crowd was still laughing softly from the Grandmaster's last victory when Elena took her seat across from him. She looked out of place under the bright stage lights, quiet, humble, and almost too ordinary for such a grand event. The Grandmaster gave her a polite smile, the kind that people give when they don't expect much. He had played against champions, computer programs, and masters from all over the world. But this was just a fun round against a modest woman from the audience. "Are you ready?" he asked with a grin. Elena nodded gently. "Yes, sir," she said in a calm, respectful voice. Her tone was soft, but her eyes told a different story. They were sharp, observant, and full of quiet confidence. Yet no one noticed that. Not the crowd, not the photographers, and not the Grandmaster himself. Everyone believed this was just a harmless, funny moment, a simple game to make people smile. The audience whispered among themselves, exchanging amused glances. Some joked that it would be over in less than 5 minutes. A few even started timing the match on their phones. The Grandmaster chuckled at their enthusiasm and made the first move, a casual opening, the kind he could play half asleep. Elena leaned slightly forward, studying the board with patience. She didn't rush. She didn't seem nervous. Her fingers moved gracefully as she responded with her first move. Simple, solid, yet oddly precise. The Grandmaster raised an eyebrow. It wasn't the kind of move a beginner would make, but he brushed it off. Maybe she had practiced online or played casually. It didn't matter. He would end this quickly. He moved his next piece with confidence, tapping the clock. The sound of the timer clicking echoed faintly in the hall. Elena followed quietly, her eyes never leaving the board. Each time he made a move, she responded in perfect rhythm, neither too fast nor too slow. A few people in the audience began to notice something unusual. Her moves were not random. They had a clear purpose, a pattern. Every piece she touched seemed to fit into an invisible plan. The crowd's laughter started to fade into murmurs. Even the Grandmaster began to sense a subtle shift in the air. He tried to lighten the mood again. "You play quite well for someone so modest," he said, smiling as he adjusted his knight. Elena looked up briefly and smiled back. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I enjoy the game." That simple answer, polite, almost innocent, caught him off guard. He had expected nervous giggling or self-doubt, but she remained perfectly composed. It was as if she was sitting in her own world, focused only on the 64 squares in front of her. As the game continued, the Grandmaster realized something. Every attempt he made to control the center of the board, she met it with quiet precision. He pushed his pieces aggressively. She defended with calm intelligence. When he tried to trap her bishop, she countered elegantly, turning his own strategy against him. It was subtle, graceful, and impossible to ignore. The audience started to grow quieter. They leaned forward in their seats, watching more closely now. The whispers grew softer, replaced by curiosity. This wasn't what anyone had expected. The woman who was supposed to be part of a light-hearted joke was beginning to look dangerous. The Grandmaster's expression changed slightly. He wasn't smiling anymore. His hand rested on his chin as he studied the board. The small spark of amusement in his eyes turned into a flicker of concentration. He had played countless opponents before, but something about this woman's calmness unsettled him. He tried to break her defense with a clever trap, a move that usually forced his opponents into panic. But Elena didn't fall for it. Instead, she played a quiet countermove that completely neutralized his plan. The audience gasped softly. A few chess enthusiasts in the back exchanged looks of disbelief. That move was not something an amateur would make. The host, sensing the shift, stopped smiling too. The laughter that had filled the room minutes ago was replaced by silence and the faint clicking of the chess clock. Elena's focus never wavered. She didn't seem to care about the cameras or the attention. To her, it was just a game, a conversation made of moves and choices. Every time the Grandmaster tried to dominate the board, she calmly redirected the flow. Her moves were like ripples, soft but powerful enough to change everything around them. Finally, the Grandmaster leaned back, exhaling slowly. He looked across the board at this modest woman, who still sat quietly, hands folded, waiting for his next move. For the first time, he wasn't sure what to do. The crowd sensed it too. Something extraordinary was happening, and everyone could feel it in the air. The man who always controlled every game was now being drawn into hers. The Grandmaster's smile returned, but this time it wasn't a confident smile. It was one of respect mixed with disbelief. He realized then that this was no ordinary woman. There was something behind that calm face, something deep and experienced. And though no one in the room knew it yet, this modest challenger was about to make history. The game that started as a joke was turning into a lesson, one that would soon silence the room. The match had begun, and the crowd was still treating it like a light-hearted show. People whispered and chuckled softly, expecting the game to end before they could even finish their coffee. The Grandmaster leaned back in his chair, his hand resting casually on the table, his every movement confident and smooth. He had played this role many times before. The charming genius, the crowd's favorite, the man who always won. Elena, sitting across from him, looked calm as ever. Her hands were still, her face peaceful, and her eyes quietly fixed on the chessboard. To most people in the room, she appeared nervous or unsure. But in truth, her silence wasn't fear, it was focus. She was observing, reading, and waiting. The Grandmaster made his first few moves quickly, not even looking up as he spoke. "Don't worry," he said lightly, his tone dripping with confidence. "I'll teach you a few tricks along the way." The crowd laughed. A few people clapped. It was all in good humor, but the way he said it carried a small edge, the kind of arrogance that came from years of winning too easily. Elena smiled politely, but said nothing. She simply made her move. It was a quiet, simple play, but somehow it felt deliberate. The Grandmaster nodded approvingly as though speaking to a child. "Ah, not bad," he said. "You've played before, haven't you?" She nodded slightly. "A little," she said softly. Her voice was gentle, almost too soft to hear. But those two words, "a little," would soon echo in his mind in a way he never expected. He moved again, fast and flashy, trying to impress the audience. He tapped the clock dramatically and leaned back with a smirk. "Let's see how long you can keep up," he said, his tone playful but slightly teasing. Elena didn't react. She looked at the board, thinking for a moment before sliding her next piece forward. Her move was small, almost invisible to anyone who didn't understand chess deeply. But something about it made the Grandmaster pause. He frowned slightly as if sensing something subtle in her play. The audience didn't notice. They were busy enjoying the show. Some people were whispering jokes about how brave she was. Others were already betting how many moves it would take before the Grandmaster delivered checkmate. But for the first time, a tiny shift began to appear on the board. It wasn't obvious, not yet, but the balance of the game had started to move in an unexpected direction. Still, the Grandmaster didn't take it seriously. He chuckled again and made another bold move, pushing his queen forward aggressively. He loved showing power early, loved forcing his opponents to react to his rhythm. That was his style, loud, confident, intimidating. But Elena didn't look intimidated. She studied the board with calm patience, her eyes moving slowly from one piece to another. Then she made a move that caught him slightly off guard, not because it was flashy, but because it was precise. It blocked his plan completely. He raised an eyebrow, amused. "Well, look at that," he said. "You've got some good instincts." Elena didn't answer. She just smiled faintly and pressed her timer. Her quietness almost made him uncomfortable, as if she didn't care about his compliments, his charm, or his fame. The audience, still unaware of what was happening on the board, laughed again when he joked, "Maybe I should go a little easier." But those sitting closer, the chess enthusiasts, began to whisper among themselves. They could see the patterns forming. The woman's moves weren't random. She was playing smart, clean, calculated, elegant. The Grandmaster leaned forward now, his playful smile softening. His fingers drummed lightly on the table. It wasn't worry, not yet, but curiosity. Who exactly was this woman? He tried to break her focus with conversation. "So what do you do?" he asked. "Are you a teacher?" "A student?" "I teach," she said quietly, her eyes still on the board. "A teacher," he repeated with a grin. "Well, then I suppose I should give you a lesson today." The audience laughed again, but Elena didn't even look up. She made her next move quickly and faster than before, and it was brilliant. Subtle, but brilliant. The Grandmaster's grin faltered for a second. He didn't expect that. He sat back looking at the board. His smile returned, but this time it looked a little tighter. "Interesting move," he muttered, half to himself. The crowd noticed his tone shift and the laughter quieted a little. Something was changing. Not in the room's temperature, but in its energy. The Grandmaster took a sip of water and made his next move carefully. He was no longer performing for the audience. For the first time, he was paying attention. Elena, calm and patient, continued her steady rhythm. She didn't rush, she didn't show emotion, just pure focus. Each move she made was like a quiet whisper that said, "I'm not here for jokes." And though the crowd didn't yet realize it, the game that had started as a joke was slowly turning into a real battle. The Grandmaster was still smiling, still pretending it was all fun, but inside, a flicker of unease had begun to grow. What he didn't know was that this was only the beginning, and that the modest woman sitting across from him was about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. The sound of the chess clock echoed softly, click, 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 as the crowd watched with quiet amusement. But slowly something began to change in the room. The laughter faded. The whispers stopped. The air grew heavier, as if everyone could sense that the game was no longer a friendly joke. The Grandmaster leaned closer to the board now, his relaxed posture gone. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied the pattern forming in front of him. Something about the woman's moves didn't make sense, not to a beginner, not to someone who had never played at a high level. They were too clean, too controlled. Elena sat straight, her face calm and her hands resting neatly on the table. She didn't show any sign of pride or excitement. She just played, focused, silent, deliberate. Every time she touched a piece, it was as if she knew exactly where it belonged. The Grandmaster made another move, a sharp one, a move meant to test her. It was a trap he'd used countless times before, one that usually forced his opponent into panic. He glanced up, expecting confusion in her eyes, but Elena didn't even blink. She looked at the board for a few seconds, then smiled faintly. Her hand reached forward and she moved her bishop with quiet grace. The Grandmaster froze. Her move didn't just block his trap, it turned it against him. One small, unexpected choice, and suddenly his position wasn't as strong as he thought. The crowd, still unaware of the deeper strategy, clapped lightly. They thought it was luck, but the few chess experts sitting near the front leaned forward in surprise. One of them whispered, "Wait, that's a master's move." The Grandmaster heard that whisper and his stomach tightened. He looked up at Elena again, really looked this time. She wasn't nervous, she wasn't flustered, and she wasn't guessing. She knew. Every move she made carried the quiet confidence of someone who understood the game deeply. He straightened in his chair. The charm in his smile began to fade. The joking tone in his voice disappeared. Now he was serious. Elena's focus didn't waver. She was playing with an almost meditative calm, breathing evenly, her eyes locked on the board. To her, this wasn't about pride or fame. It wasn't about proving herself. She was simply lost in the game she loved, the same game that had been her quiet companion for years. The audience could feel the shift now, too. The energy in the hall had changed completely. People weren't chatting or laughing anymore. They were leaning forward, watching closely. The Grandmaster was no longer the entertainer. He was the one being tested. He moved again, this time more carefully. He tapped his clock quickly, his expression focused. Elena responded within seconds. Her moves flowed effortlessly, as if she had already mapped out the next 10 steps. A bead of sweat formed on the Grandmaster's forehead. He wiped it quickly, pretending to adjust his glasses. For the first time that day, he wasn't in control. The match that had started as a performance was now a real competition. He tried to reassert dominance, pushing his queen forward to attack. But Elena anticipated it perfectly. With a calm hand, she moved her knight, and in a single, elegant move, she not only defended but also threatened one of his key pieces. The audience gasped softly. Even those who didn't fully understand chess could tell something big had happened. The once confident Grandmaster was now visibly tense. He stared at the board, his mind racing. Who is she? He wondered. How is she doing this? Elena sat quietly, waiting. She didn't look at him, didn't seek reaction or attention. She just waited for his next move. There was a serenity in her that made her presence even more powerful. Finally, the Grandmaster smiled. But it wasn't the same smile as before. It was smaller, almost humble. You play very well, he said softly. Thank you, Elena replied, still watching the board. Her voice was steady, kind but firm. He nodded, acknowledging something he hadn't wanted to admit. This woman was not an amateur. She was something else. The audience could sense the tension between them now, not hostility, but respect mixed with disbelief. The Grandmaster took a deep breath and leaned closer to the board. His ego, once inflated by confidence, was now replaced with curiosity. He was facing a mystery. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of the timer. The Grandmaster played with all his skill, but every time he tried to seize control, Elena quietly took it back. Her calmness was her weapon. She played like water flowing around every obstacle he built. Soon the pattern became undeniable. The woman who had been invited as a joke was now in command of the board. A reporter in the back whispered, "This isn't a show anymore. This is a real match." The crowd didn't laugh this time. They watched in awe, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would be talked about long after the tournament ended. And as the Grandmaster studied the board once more, his pride began to fade completely. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: challenge. The energy in the room was no longer playful. It was electric, alive, and filled with tension. Everyone could feel it. The Grandmaster's confidence had met its match, and the quiet, modest woman sitting across from him had just changed the entire game. The air in the room had changed completely. What started as laughter and applause was now replaced by a thick, heavy silence. You could hear nothing but the quiet clicking of the chess clock and the soft sound of chess pieces sliding across the board. Every eye in the hall was fixed on the game. Even the waiters who had been moving around stopped where they stood, holding their trays mid-air. The Grandmaster's confidence had faded. The easy smile that had charmed the crowd earlier was gone, replaced by concentration and disbelief. His fingers moved slower now, his eyes darting between the board and the woman sitting across from him. Elena remained perfectly calm. Her posture was straight, her face peaceful, and her breathing steady. She didn't seem nervous or proud. She was just present, fully in the moment. Her quietness, once mistaken for shyness, now carried a strange power, the kind of silence that commands attention. The audience was hypnotized. No one dared to speak. A few leaned forward, clutching the edge of their seats. Even those who didn't understand chess could feel it. Something unbelievable was happening right in front of them. The Grandmaster moved his rook, trying to regain control. He was careful now, almost too careful. Each decision took longer than before. He tapped his clock and sat back, his jaw tight. Elena studied the board for a few seconds, then made her move, smooth, clean, and unexpected. It was a perfect counterattack. A murmur swept through the audience. The chess experts in the front row exchanged quick glances. They understood exactly what had happened, and they couldn't believe it. One of them whispered, "That's not luck. That's strategy." The Grandmaster looked at the board again, his eyes wide for a moment. He hadn't seen it coming. His position, which had seemed strong just minutes ago, was now in danger. For the first time in a long time, he felt pressure. Real pressure. He moved again, faster this time, trying to recover. But Elena responded almost instantly, her moves cutting through his defenses like a blade. Every piece she touched seemed to have a purpose. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. The hall grew so quiet that you could hear the faint ticking of a wall clock somewhere in the distance. The audience had stopped breathing. No one moved. All eyes were on the Grandmaster's face, watching his growing frustration, his disbelief, and the small flickers of respect in his eyes. He tried to speak, to break the tension. "You're quite good," he said finally, forcing a small laugh. Elena looked up for a brief moment. "I just love the game," she said softly, then looked back at the board. Her voice was calm, almost serene. But there was strength in it, a kind of quiet pride that didn't need applause. The Grandmaster studied her face for a moment. He realized then that this woman wasn't trying to embarrass him or prove anything. She was simply playing beautifully, purely, and without ego. He took a deep breath and moved another piece, but he already knew. The balance of the game had shifted completely. She was no longer defending. She was leading. A journalist in the back lowered his camera slowly. "She's winning," he whispered to himself, and she was. Move by move, Elena's position grew stronger. Her pieces seemed to dance across the board, creating patterns of precision that even the Grandmaster struggled to understand. The spectators who had once giggled now sat frozen, their laughter replaced with awe. The silence in the room was almost sacred, as if everyone knew they were witnessing something rare, something that defied expectations. The Grandmaster's mind raced. He had played against world champions, computer algorithms, and prodigies, but never had he felt so humbled. His opponent hadn't spoken a single boastful word. She didn't smirk or gloat. She just played, with grace, with intelligence, and with something deeper than pride. Every move she made was a quiet statement. Respect the game. Respect the player. Never underestimate anyone. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The Grandmaster rubbed his temples, deep in thought. The weight of the silence pressed down on him. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching, not to see him win, but to see what he would do next. And then, something remarkable happened. He looked up at her, and for the first time, he smiled, not out of arrogance, but out of admiration. It was a small, honest smile, one that said, "I see you now." Elena met his gaze briefly, nodded politely, and made her next move. Check. The word echoed in his mind. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew. The crowd didn't need to be told either. They could feel it. The tide had turned completely. The Grandmaster exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. Around him, the audience sat in stunned silence. No one clapped, no one spoke. The entire hall felt suspended in time, caught between disbelief and admiration. And in that heavy, golden silence, something profound happened. The room that once laughed at a modest woman now looked at her with nothing but respect. The game wasn't over yet, but the silence spoke louder than any words could. The Grandmaster, humbled but intrigued, adjusted his pieces and prepared for the next round of moves. But deep down he already knew. This was not just a game anymore. This was history being written in quiet moves and unspoken respect. The game had reached a strange kind of stillness, the kind of silence that hangs in the air before something unforgettable happens. Every person in the room could sense it. The Grandmaster leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on the board as if staring into a puzzle he couldn't solve. His confident aura had melted away, replaced by quiet focus. Elena sat across from him, her expression calm and unreadable. Her hands rested gently on her lap between moves, her breathing steady. She looked almost peaceful, like someone playing in her living room, not on a grand stage in front of hundreds of people. The board was a battlefield now. Pieces were scattered everywhere, pawns fallen, rooks cornered, the queen circling like a hawk searching for a mistake. For a long time, neither player moved. The audience watched, frozen, afraid even to breathe too loudly. Finally, the Grandmaster broke the silence. He pushed one of his knights forward, a bold, risky move. His plan was clear. He wanted to corner her king, to turn the tide before it was too late. The move was clever, dangerous, and it carried the pride of a man unwilling to lose. A murmur swept through the audience. The experts whispered, "That's his chance. If she doesn't see it, he wins." But Elena saw it. She saw everything. Her eyes scanned the board once, twice, and then something in her gaze changed. Her calm eyes sharpened. A faint smile appeared at the corner of her lips. Not arrogant, not mocking, but knowing. It was the kind of smile only someone who truly understands the game can wear. The Grandmaster noticed it too. His heartbeat quickened. She's seen it, he thought. She's actually seen it. Elena leaned forward, her fingers hovering above the board for just a moment. Then she moved her bishop, a quiet, graceful slide across the squares. The audience didn't understand at first. It looked like an ordinary move. But then a few seconds later, the whispers started. One spectator gasped. Another whispered, "No way." No way she just did that. The Grandmaster's eyes widened. He leaned closer, his face tightening as realization hit him. Her bishop had completely dismantled his entire plan. The trap he had set, the one that should have won him the match, had turned against him. It wasn't just defense. It was genius. That one move changed everything. His knight was trapped. His queen was suddenly cornered. His king, once protected, now stood exposed. The position on the board had flipped. In an instant, the hunter had become the hunted. A wave of astonishment rippled through the crowd. The silence broke into soft murmurs and then into gasps. Even the commentators watching from the side looked stunned. The Grandmaster sat back slowly, his hands on his face, a quiet laugh escaping him, not out of mockery but disbelief. "Unbelievable," he whispered under his breath. Elena didn't react. She didn't celebrate. She simply sat there waiting for his move. To her, it was just another step, the natural flow of a game she had long understood. But for everyone else in that room, it was the moment everything changed. The cameras zoomed in. The Grandmaster's proud expression was gone, replaced by deep respect. He looked across at her, and for the first time since the game began, his eyes were gentle. "Who are you?" he asked softly, half smiling, half in awe. Elena looked up, meeting his gaze. "Just someone who loves chess," she said quietly. Her words were simple, but the weight of them hung in the air like music. The crowd felt it. The Grandmaster felt it. It wasn't arrogance, it was truth. He nodded slowly, smiling to himself. The match was no longer a battle of ego. It was something purer, two minds meeting at the edge of brilliance. As the Grandmaster made his next move, the audience held their breath. He tried to fight back, but every move he made seemed to tighten her control. The woman everyone had underestimated was now leading the Grandmaster step by step toward a checkmate that felt inevitable. Minutes passed like hours. Every click of the clock echoed through the silent hall. Elena's focus never broke, her hand steady, her eyes clear. She wasn't just playing to win. She was playing beautifully with a kind of quiet art that made even the Grandmaster forget his pride. And then, it happened. She lifted her queen, paused for just a moment, and placed it gently on a square that sealed the board's fate. The Grandmaster stared for a long time, and then slowly, a smile spread across his face. A genuine, humble smile. "Brilliant," he whispered. The audience erupted into applause. Some stood. Others covered their mouths in shock. Cameras flashed, capturing the exact moment the greatest player in the room realized he had been outplayed. Not by a rival, not by a professional, but by a quiet, modest woman who had walked in from the crowd. The applause grew louder, echoing through the hall like thunder. But Elena didn't look up right away. She waited, calm and graceful, as if she didn't need the recognition. For her, it wasn't about winning. It was about playing with truth, patience, and respect. The Grandmaster extended his hand across the board. "You've taught me something today," he said softly. Elena smiled gently and shook his hand. "We've both learned," she replied. And in that moment, surrounded by cheers, cameras, and flashing lights, the room that once laughed at her fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't out of surprise. It was out of respect. The board looked like a battlefield after a storm. Pieces scattered everywhere. Pawns fallen like soldiers, queens cornered, kings surrounded. Every move, every decision had led to this single moment. The Grandmaster sat still, his hand frozen above the board, staring at the position as if trying to change it by sheer will. Elena sat across from him, quiet as ever. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, her expression calm, almost peaceful. She didn't look proud or excited. She simply looked content, as if she already knew the game had reached its end. The audience waited in complete silence. The sound of the chess clock ticked softly, counting down the final seconds of tension. No one moved. No one whispered. It felt like the entire room was holding its breath. The Grandmaster finally leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. He glanced up at Elena, then back at the board. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "Every move. Beautiful." Elena smiled faintly. "It's your turn," she said gently. He nodded, a small smile appearing on his face. Not the confident grin from before, but a smile of admiration, the kind a teacher gives when realizing the student has surpassed him. He moved his king one final square, It was his last hope. Elena looked at the board for only a few seconds. Her eyes softened, and then she lifted her queen. Slowly, gracefully, she placed it down with a soft click. Checkmate. The word was quiet, barely louder than a whisper, yet it echoed through the entire hall. For a moment, there was no reaction, just silence, a deep, powerful silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. The Grandmaster stared at the board, then at her, and finally, he smiled. A real smile, humble, honest, proud. He reached out his hand. "You win," he said simply. Elena hesitated for a moment, then took his hand with a warm, respectful shake. There was no gloating, no pride, only mutual respect. Two minds, once opponents, now shared something greater, understanding. And then the silence broke. It started with one clap, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted into thunderous applause. People stood up from their seats, cheering, shouting, clapping until their palms turned red. Cameras flashed like stars. The sound filled every corner of the room, echoing through the grand hall like a wave. The Grandmaster stood up too, still holding her hand. He raised it in the air for everyone to see, a gesture of honor, not defeat. The crowd went wild. Elena looked around, her eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't come here for fame. She hadn't come for attention. But now, hundreds of people were cheering her name, their faces filled with admiration. The Grandmaster leaned closer and whispered so only she could hear. "You remind me why I fell in love with this game." Her eyes softened. "It's never about winning," she replied. "It's about understanding." He nodded slowly, his respect deep and sincere. A young boy in the front row, holding a small plastic chessboard, looked up at Elena with shining eyes. "She beat the Grandmaster," he whispered to his father. "She's amazing." Elena heard him and smiled. For her, that moment and that look of inspiration meant more than any trophy could. As the applause continued, the host stepped onto the stage, still speechless. "Ladies and gentlemen," he finally said, voice trembling with emotion, "we have just witnessed something extraordinary." The camera zoomed in on Elena, her modest smile shining beneath the bright lights. She looked almost out of place amid the glamour. Simple, graceful, humble. Yet there she was, the woman who had walked into a match meant to be a joke and turned it into a moment the world would never forget. The Grandmaster bowed slightly to her, a gesture of true respect. The audience followed, standing and clapping harder, some with tears in their eyes. It wasn't just about chess anymore, and it was about humility, brilliance, and the quiet strength that hides behind modesty. Elena gathered her things quietly. As she stood to leave the stage, people reached out to shake her hand, to thank her, to take pictures. But she smiled kindly and said only, "It was just a game." Yet everyone in that room knew it was far more than that. It was a lesson, a story, a moment that would be told for generations. And as she walked toward the exit, the crowd still cheering behind her, the Grandmaster watched her go with deep respect in his eyes. He whispered to himself, "The quiet ones, they're always the most dangerous." The applause continued long after she was gone. The hall, once filled with arrogance and laughter, was now filled with admiration and wonder. The match had ended, but its memory, her calmness, her brilliance, her checkmate, would never fade. The applause still echoed through the grand hall long after the final move. People were standing, clapping, cheering. But Elena, the quiet woman at the center of it all, seemed almost untouched by the noise. She simply smiled, nodded politely, and began to gather the chess pieces back onto the board, as if resetting everything to how it was before. The Grandmaster stood beside her, still dazed by what had just happened. He had faced hundreds of players in his lifetime, world champions, grandmasters, prodigies, but never had he felt something quite like this. There was no arrogance in her play, no showmanship, just a kind of effortless mastery that came from years of quiet love for the game. Reporters crowded near the stage, cameras flashing, microphones pushed forward. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Who was she? The host, still holding the microphone with trembling hands, stepped closer. "Ma'am," he said, his voice full of awe, "you've just defeated one of the greatest chess minds of our time. May we know your name?" Elena looked up, her calm eyes meeting his. "My name is Elena Novik," she said softly. The name meant nothing to most people in the audience. But at the back of the hall, an older man suddenly gasped. "Novik?" he whispered. "Did she say Novik?" A few others turned to look at him. He nodded, eyes wide. "I remember her. From years ago." The murmurs began to spread through the crowd. Some people opened their phones, typing her name into search bars. Within seconds, whispers grew louder. And then one voice near the front said what everyone else was realizing. "She used to be a champion." The host blinked in surprise. "A champion?" he repeated, turning to Elena. "Is that true?" Elena smiled faintly. "A long time ago," she said. "Before life took me in a different direction." The Grandmaster looked at her, stunned. "You were a professional player?" She nodded gently. "I was," she said. "But I stopped competing after my father passed away. I had to take care of my mother. And later I began teaching children at a small school near my town. I never thought I'd play in front of an audience again." The room fell silent again. Not the tense silence of competition this time, but the soft emotional kind that comes when hearts understand something deeper. The host swallowed hard. "So all these years," he said slowly, "you've been teaching chess?" Elena smiled. "Just teaching," she said. "Mostly children. They remind me why the game matters. It's not about titles. It's about patience, respect, and imagination." The Grandmaster looked down at the board and shook his head slowly, a small, amazed smile on his face. "You've been hiding brilliance behind humility," he said quietly. "All this time." Elena chuckled softly. "Not hiding," she replied, "just living." Her words were so simple, yet they carried a kind of power that touched everyone in the room. It wasn't the kind of victory people usually celebrated. It was something purer, something human. One reporter near the front wiped a tear from her eye. "You've just inspired millions," she said. Elena looked at her kindly. "If I've done that," she said, "then I've already won." The audience applauded again, softer this time. Not the wild, thunderous applause of before, but a steady, heartfelt rhythm of respect. Even the Grandmaster joined in, clapping slowly, his eyes full of admiration. He turned to her once more and said, "You could still compete. You still have that fire." Elena shook her head gently. "The world doesn't need more trophies," she said. "It needs more teachers, more people who remind others to love what they do." The simplicity of her words struck everyone. Even the cameras stopped flashing for a moment, as though giving space for the message to sink in. The Grandmaster extended his hand again. "Then let me say thank you for reminding me." She shook his hand and smiled warmly. "And thank you," she said, "for challenging me again." As she walked off the stage, the audience parted for her like a quiet wave. Some reached out to touch her hand, others just smiled. She moved through them gracefully, not as a celebrity, but as a person whose strength came from humility. The cameras followed her until she reached the door. Just before stepping outside, she turned one last time, glanced at the hall filled with faces, and smiled. That smile was soft, gentle, but unforgettable. It was the kind of smile that carried a story, one of loss, love, patience, and redemption. Outside, the night air was cool. She took a deep breath, feeling the quiet freedom of it all. Somewhere, a few children from her school would probably be watching the replay online by morning, cheering, jumping, proud that their teacher had done the impossible. Elena pulled her coat tighter and began walking home, her footsteps light against the pavement. Behind her, in the hall she'd just left, the crowd was still talking about her. The modest woman who defeated the Grandmaster, not with arrogance, but with grace. And though she had disappeared back into the night, her story had already begun to spread. A story of humility, brilliance, and the reminder that greatness doesn't always make noise. Sometimes, it sits quietly, waiting for the right moment to be seen. Long after Elena had left the hall, the echoes of her victory still lingered in the air. The audience remained seated, whispering in awe as if afraid that speaking too loudly might break the fragile beauty of what they had just witnessed. The chessboard still sat in the middle of the stage, pieces frozen in their final positions, the queen standing tall in front of the defeated king. It wasn't just a board anymore. It was a symbol. The Grandmaster stood quietly beside it, staring at the final move, that perfect, elegant checkmate. The noise of the crowd slowly faded into a low hum behind him. For the first time in many years, he felt something he hadn't felt since his youth. Humility. He smiled softly to himself, shaking his head. "All these years," he murmured, "I thought I understood the game." A reporter approached him gently, still clutching a microphone. "How does it feel?" she asked. "To be defeated by someone you didn't expect?" He looked at her and smiled. "Defeat isn't the right word," he said. "Today I didn't lose. I learned." The simplicity of his words struck everyone nearby. It wasn't bitterness or pride in his voice, it was respect. Deep, genuine respect. He turned back to the chessboard and ran a finger along the edge of one of the fallen pieces. "We live in a world," he said softly, "that often mistakes silence for weakness. But today a quiet woman reminded us that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits patiently until the right moment to speak." The crowd listened in silence, their hearts heavy with admiration. The Grandmaster looked up, his expression thoughtful. "She didn't just beat me," he continued. "She reminded me why I fell in love with chess in the first place, because it's not about ego. It's about understanding. It's about respect. It's about the beauty of thinking quietly." Outside, Elena walked through the cool evening air, unaware of the impact she had left behind. Her phone buzzed with dozens of messages. Journalists, organizers, old friends, even strangers sending congratulations. She smiled softly but didn't reply to any of them. Instead, she stopped by a park bench, sat down, and looked up at the stars. For her, this wasn't victory. It was peace. She thought of her students, the little ones who struggled to learn the basics of chess, who often got frustrated when they lost. She thought of how she always told them, "The board teaches patience. It doesn't care who you are, only how you play." And that was the truth she had carried all her life. The next morning, her story was everywhere. Newspapers called her the modest genius. Headlines read, "Unknown woman defeats Grandmaster in stunning match." Social media was flooded with clips of the moment she said, "Checkmate." But the world didn't just celebrate her win, they celebrated her grace, her calmness, her refusal to boast. At the school where she taught, her students ran to her the moment she arrived. "Miss Elena, we saw you on the news," they shouted. "You beat the Grandmaster." Elena laughed softly. "No," she said gently. "I just played my game." One of the children looked at her curiously. "Weren't you scared?" She knelt down and smiled. "Sometimes," she said, "the world will laugh at you before it listens to you. But if you stay calm and keep doing what you love, one day, the world will fall silent." The children listened wide-eyed, and in that moment, they understood something that no classroom could have taught better. Meanwhile, the Grandmaster gave a short interview later that day. When asked what he thought of Elena, he said, "I met many champions in my career, but only a few who truly changed how I see the game. She reminded me that greatness doesn't always come wrapped in fame or applause. Sometimes it wears simplicity, humility, and a quiet smile." He paused, then added with a small grin, "And I hope to play her again one day, but this time, I'll be ready." The world loved his words, but what everyone remembered most wasn't the match or even the result. It was the lesson it carried, a story of respect, patience, and the quiet brilliance that hides behind ordinary faces. Elena returned to her simple life, teaching and smiling as always. But the story followed her everywhere, inspiring people who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. It reminded them that talent doesn't need to shout to be seen. It just needs a moment, one quiet, perfect moment, to reveal itself. And so, the legend of that match lived on. The day when a modest woman faced a Grandmaster not to prove her worth, but to remind the world of something far greater, that true mastery isn't measured by victory, but by grace.